Hey, welcome back friends. It's Richard here from Crash Course Hobbies, and today we're talking terrain, and I absolutely love painting terrain. I like to just bust it out quickly. I've got a game coming up later this week, and I really want to use this new terrain that I put together from this terrain crate from Mantic. So I'm going to show you how I paint up terrain really quickly and simply using just a couple of very simple tools, and then we'll go on to the extra credit step at the end. If you want to do that, you can, but with that, let's get over to the hobby desk. All right, so we're at the hobby desk now. I've got this terrain primed up here. This is from Mantic. This is their terrain crate stuff. It's pretty cool modular terrain that's kind of just like Legos. You can pretty much put it together in any configuration that you want. So I built this little kind of like bastion setup here with the walls, little tower, and then used the extra pieces to make just like a little 3-story kind of corner ruin piece. And then a couple little extras here, like a little walkway and a couple little broken corners. But the idea here is that I've got a bunch of apple barrel paints. You can pick these up at Walmart or on Amazon. They're usually about 50 cents a bottle. They're super cheap and they're great for painting terrain. Now, what I usually like to do is just get a paper plate like this and figure out what color paints I want to use. For this, I'm thinking of like a more industrial, sci-fi, lots of like silvery, blue, gray kind of tones. Probably not going to go too rusty and grimy and dirty on this one because it'll be more of like a freshly destroyed kind of ruin rather than it's been sitting out and rusting away and getting gross and stuff. But we'll kind of see how it turns out because I don't really have a whole lot of plans going on here. Now, the secret sauce for this method is sponge painting. Now, usually we'll use like, this is from one of those big car peanut sponges, and you can get them super cheap like Walmart or pretty much anywhere. Now, one thing I like to do as I'm getting ready is just go through and start to kind of rip off any right angles or areas that look a little bit too neat that are gonna come off in our paint job, because we don't want it to look like we just stamped it with a bunch of square stamps. So I'll usually do that, and then I'll hold it and kind of squish it like this to round it out a little bit more. And so then we're gonna pick the colors that we want. Now I primed this black so that all the recesses and areas will be black. If you wanted to do like a more rusty kind of style or something, you might wanna go with something that's like a little bit more brown as your base coat sprayed on there, because it'll save you a lot of time. But I'm gonna go with this kind of gray blue color, like a Payne's gray kind of, and I'm gonna hit it with a little bit of this Caribbean blue. And I think, we'll see how it turns out, but I think it'll look nice with the gray over top of it, the lighter gray. So now I'm just mixing it up into my plate here, getting a bunch on my sponge, and then nothing super fancy about it here. We're just gonna start kind of dabbing it all over the terrain. And the idea here is that I'm basically just trying to paint everything that's raised above the texture that's already in the terrain. Trying to hold it so you guys can see it in focus. Then we're gonna go through, I might do the floor a different color later, but I like to just get a good base coat on everything, and then we can kind of detail it up as we go. One thing about this sponge painting method that you're gonna notice is that it's really messy. So I'm wearing gloves just because I don't wanna deal with having to wash it off of my hands later. You don't necessarily have to. And it lets me hold the terrain. Maybe if I were painting it a little bit more carefully, I wouldn't want to be holding it while I'm painting it on there, just because I'm smearing the paint around with my hands as I'm doing it. But because this is gonna be a pretty straightforward, kind of imperfect ruin paint job, you'll see it doesn't really make much of a difference in the end product. Another thing with this method that we will talk about, but I guess we can go ahead and just mention it, is that it's kind of like using wet blending a little bit, because I don't spend a lot of time waiting for the paint to dry. We're just gonna keep hitting it with multiple colors as we go. So here's this pewter gray. Can be a little bit messy doing this, so be mindful of where you're gonna be doing this at. If you're at the dining room table or something, you can kind of splatter paint around. You just want to be careful of that. Test it on the smaller piece. Lighter dabs now that we are being a little bit more careful with this lighter gray color. So I'm gonna be hitting it, just kind of tapping it on there, and that's another reason why we don't want to have the right angles on the sponge because those can be kind of come off and be kind of left on what we're painting. We're going thick enough with the sponge that we're not trying to create like a rocky texture, where if we went lighter with it, we might be creating like, you know, more of a speckly kind of stone. I want to get heavier with it and basically use this as just a way to massively paint the raised edges of it, because I want to go for more of a metal than a stone. One thing you do want to be careful of, and I do want to mention this because it is important, is you want to make sure you're dabbing your sponge and not pulling your sponge, because that will make it look just like a really messy paintbrush job versus more of a flat kind of speckly, you know, we're getting more battle damage look here. So just make sure that you're picking that sponge up and you're dabbing it on as you go, just like this, because it's covering it really nicely, not smearing it. You know, I'll show you what it would look like if you dab it and you kind of smear, so you get that like really bad kind of brushed look. So we'll just dab. So at this point, we're basically at a table ready stage with just 2 passes with the sponge. I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not happy with that, so I want to do a little bit more, but I'm gonna show you just with, hit that with my black on accident, just with some black paint, we're gonna go to all the battle damaged areas and just gonna dab all around the edges with some black. And what that does is it just kind of creates like a charred look a little bit more of a transition. And I find that that just adds a little bit more of an accent to anywhere that's kind of got some battle damage to it. So this little hole here, all these broken off edges, real easy to just take a little black on your sponge and just hit all these little edges all around where it's cracked. From here, since we're going with, you know, I want to go with that more futuristic-y, less like freshly ruined kind of complex. I've got some silver here, and I'm gonna start by just hitting things that are gonna be a little bit more metallic. In some cases with like shinier metallics, I like to hit them around the edges, because if they were painted, for example, that's where the paint would scratch off. With this, I'm just kind of hitting corners, you know, different speckles, things like that. I'm not gonna add too much of this because this is just kind of gonna be where kind of the walls have been scraped and some of that shininess is coming through. Now that we've got that done, we're gonna add just some extra details. So I'm gonna add a little bit of brown. I like to add a little bit of colors. Just helps things stand out and pop a little bit more. Take a tiny bit of brown. It's gonna mix too much. Fresh part of the sponge. And we're just gonna dab it all around this walkway area. Just kind of like where people's dirty boots might have been. And then what I also like to do is take whatever that same set of colors is, so in this case the browns and the greens, and we're gonna just hit the bottom third of our terrain with it. And this is just kind of gonna simulate the walls being dirty. Anytime you can have little pops of color like this on your terrain, it makes it more interesting. Even if you think it might look a little out of place, once it's all dried and in there, I think it adds a lot of character to it. And you can see by doing all of this while it's wet and workable, we're really blending everything together as we're doing it. And even when I get fingerprints or whatever, I'll just hit them again and boom, they're good. Now we could call this done, but so here I'm gonna go back around and hit all the exterior walls with a lighter gray around the top third. And if we get over our green and browns at the bottom too, that's okay. Just gonna go over everything. I want the outside of this thing to be a little brighter, a little more pop to it. Inner walls I'm not as worried about. We could hit those as well, but that's gonna be up to you. Again with the brown. Now here you can see like I got too much, so I'll just take my sponge and smooth it out. Hit it a little bit, hit it again, dab it out. Super quick and easy. This whole thing is just, this whole method is crazy fast. All right, so here we have it ready to go. After I've put a couple of coats of the sponge on, we went with the dark blue-gray, kind of a lighter gray, and then just hit black on all of the battle damaged areas, edges, and then just a little bit of whatever our ground color is gonna be. For example, on this one I went with just a little bit of green, a little bit of brown. And now we're gonna go and talk about some of the extra credit steps you can do that are still pretty quick and easy, but we're gonna add a lot more character to this thing. So now we're moving on to the extra credit steps of this process. Now, like I mentioned, this is a quick and very dirty painting process. So I'm not gonna do anything super clean or fancy. I am going to dip my brush and mix up a dirty green, brown, gross kind of color. I might even, almost out of brown, I might even take a little squirt of water and kind of make sure that it's real runny. But this whole process is very, like, you don't need to be careful about pretty much anything. I might have mixed too much gray into this. We'll just mix it on this brush here. A little bit of green, a little bit of brown, a little bit more green, yeah. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this kind of grossness and just going to pick a top edge somewhere, and we could kind of make it, dab it like it's kind of running down, you know? Something spilled there, or something was gross there, just like that. You can do this all over. I'm not gonna do it too much on this particular piece because, like I said, I don't want this to be too nasty, but you know, it kind of evolves as you paint it. You know, it's you go in with, at least in this method, and kind of painting on the fly like I like to here. I kind of just come up with the story as I go. So, you know, here we're just adding a bit, and this kind of green and brown tints are becoming more and more prominent part of our theme. So, you know, you just kind of make it up as you go. We're gonna grab a little bit more, maybe this top window here, we'll just have a bit running down, maybe it's dripping, maybe up here on this little battlement. But to me, this is the fun part. This is where we're giving the terrain some character, and you can spend as much time on this part as you want, or as little time on this part as you want, and you know, it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of get it to a point where you're happy with it by adding some of these little extra details. And finally, I like to go around and add some shadows with my airbrush. Now this step is totally optional, so if you don't have an airbrush, it's not a big deal. But if you do, I like to take a little bit of black ink and hit the terrain all over on the bottom third just to add some shadows. You can also add kind of cracks where walls meet floors, or underneath areas that have a second floor or something like that. And then I'll also go around and reinforce that battle damage area that we painted black with the sponge, just to give it a little bit smoother transition. And then finally, I saw this little area that looked like a bit of a light over the door, and in my mind I'm thinking they locked this place down before the battle, and so maybe this big red light is, you know, there to indicate to people outside that the doors are locked up and they're not getting inside. And so I just used a little bit of white ink, a little bit of red contrast paint, and just threw a little cheeky red light with some OSL on there, and we're done. So let's check it out. Well, that's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, maybe think about sharing it with your hobby friends, and you can follow me on Instagram at Crash Course Hobbies, where I post lots of pictures and updates and things like that. But thank you so much for watching if you did make it this far into the video, and if you haven't already, I'd love to see you subscribe. But as always, thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.